South Africa people scream and shout. So good evening. Great, thanks for coming tonight and joining us for the screening of Winnie. My name is Gabi Nobo. I'm the curator of the Biennale, together with my co-curators, Tiago De Paula Souza is here, who is also taking care of the program, and also Lebu Tlali, who is working together with Tiago. So my role tonight is to introduce the film, and then after the film we will have our friend and colleague George Shire, who will give us an analysis of the film, which trust me, it will be invigorating. So please stay. Winnie is a film by Pascal Lamshe and the late Peter Makurube. It is a documentary about Nomzamo Winnie Madikizela Mandela, who died on the 2nd of April at the age of 81. But this film is about her life and how she lived on her own terms and spoke truth to power. This film was also shown at a festival in Cape Town, the Encounters Festival, in May of 2017. Also Sundance, where it won a prize, and Seattle and other festivals as well. Very few people saw this film when it was shown in South Africa. They were not able to see it because of the nature of the festival culture. In her review of the film, Sisonke Msimang described it as a portrait of South African masculinities and its discontents. At its core, she writes, it is an examination of the fragility of patriarchal men. Whilst other films exist that have been made about Winnie, what sets Lamche and Makurube's films aside is that it is told largely in her own words. The directors interviewed many of her friends and collaborators, but also tracked down her enemies and began unraveling a story involving a psychological warfare and other dirty tricks, campaigns, coming to the conclusion that she and Nelson Mandela were two sides of the same powerful coin, and sometimes something terrible had been done to them. Pascal described how she came to make the film as such, and I will quote from what she says. I made 3 films in South Africa and interviewed Nelson Mandela for 2 of them. But I was always intrigued by Winnie and felt a little unsettled by the adulation that was poured on her husband, while she was cast as a fallen woman. Charlie Mingus' 1963 masterpiece, The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady, seemed to capture the essence of their legacy in the album title. Her reputation amongst people I encountered in Europe and in the States was unshakably negative. And yet in South Africa, and not only in the townships, Winnie was loved and respected, and she continued to live among her people in Soweto. With the announcement of Winnie's death in April, both the local and international media framed her legacy within the shadow of her husband, Nelson Mandela, and the accusations against her. The New York Times headline read, Winnie Madikizela Mandela, a tarnished leader of South Africa's liberation, dies at 81. But with the intervention of Black Twitter, within an hour, the headline was changed to Winnie Madikizela Mandela is dead at 81, fought apartheid. From then on, we witnessed how many Black people in many parts of the world, young South African women especially, began a 2-week-long counterattack which reframed and repositioned Winnie as the radical freedom fighter that the racist, white supremacist-based system of apartheid created her to be. During the mourning period, the film Winnie was subsequently screened on South African TV and seen by millions of people, unleashing yet another counterattack on those who have painted her legacy in the negative. We have, as I've mentioned, invited our colleague and friend George Shire to respond to this film, providing a post-film analysis which we hope you will stay for. And I'd like to just give a brief bio to George, because I won't come back, or I'll come sit very close to the stage. George Shearer is an independent cultural theorist, DJ, and jazz saxophone enthusiast. Over a period spanning more than 35 years, he has taught at many universities and higher educational institutions across Britain. He is also on the editorial boards of Soundings, a journal of politics and culture, and Dark Matter, a journal of post-colonial theory and culture. He lives in London. Thank you, and enjoy the film.
Thank you, Doctor. And thank you. I'm really honored to be here. I suppose I want to say thank you again to Kabi in two or three ways. One is that I'm a fan. Yeah? I don't know if there are any people here who are football fans, and I'm an Arsenal football fan, and I know how to be a fan, and I'm a fan. But I'm also a fan in the kind of project to make curatoriality the site of knowledge, which the entire curatorial team has been trying to do with this project. So I'm a fan in that sense. And I do want to invite you to that sense of doing curatoriality as a site of knowledge, because of what it allows us to think or see or live or enjoy that we might not have thought about before. So I come to saying a number of things now in honor to that. I am a fan. Okay. I'm trying to tune a saxophone. Yeah? So at the moment I'll find notes. I'm never very good at talking about a film after I've seen it. I know a lot of people who go see a film and they then get together as a group of friends, go to a restaurant and talk about what it is that they've seen. I'm not very good at that. I like the film and images to settle a bit, and then maybe I might say something about film. And I don't have that luxury tonight, so I'm going to try something that I rarely do. I've never done. I don't do film reviews in that sense. I try to enter a conversation with the film and the images that I first saw in solitary sense, and now for the first time together with you. And really, in order to be able to do that, I thought I would get to it conjuncturally. That is to say, I use the word conjuncture borrowed from two thinkers. One is Antonio Gramsci, the other is Stuart Hall. By conjuncture, I mean when all processes come together to produce a coherent whole, to produce a way that allows us to see something that we didn't see before. Or put it another way, what is this problem space in which we're looking at this work? Of course, documentary film practice still draws me to it, partly because it takes me to the archive. It takes me to material that is already there. And in that sense allows us to see that which we didn't see before, in order for provided what I would say, the politics of representation, if not the struggle over meaning. Okay, that's the things that were going on in my mind as I was looking, as I was sharing, as I was going through this scopic, this sonic, this scopic moment of watching these images and so on. The first thing that came to me is the idea of presence. The idea of presence, to most of you who in this room who are interested in performance, is a quite important. The question of presence. Who's there? The presence in performance usage terms. One bit. The second is presence in a kind of psychoanalytic sense. Psychoanalytic in the sense about the kind of grammar that allows you to internally interrogate the self and other. And perhaps the third about present is, of course, the logic of coloniality, of apartheid, of slavery, of gender. There's those three things about presence. And I was kind of immediately drawn to the embodiment, sentience, of the way in which the figure of Winnie figures, stays, rests, occupies that space, that the symbolic nature of it. Now, it's a day or so after the celebration of 100, if Nelson Mandela was alive, he would have been 100 years. Well, it's, in one sense, one could say that's the conjuncture, the reason we are. I know it's kind of difficult. I'm trying not to think to remember, to symbolize, to put into place representationally Winnie through the prism of Nelson. It's hard to do that. Perhaps that's precisely why I didn't mention it as my beginning. But I do want to say, interesting enough, it's this 100, he would have been 100 this week had he lived today. And then I want to ask the other question, which is, have we been, after all, celebrating the wrong Mandela? And if we have, what does it say about, not just about the ANC, but ourselves in relation to the question of gender, or the symbolism of the question of woman, Madonna, whore, devil? What does it tell us? What does it say about ourselves there and here? And it seems to me the film does that, invites you to recenter, not just Winnie Mandela herself, but the story of womanhood. Now, you might notice my hesitance to go immediately to say gender, because what I want to do is to, having learned a great deal from Judith Butler about gender being performative, I kept on thinking about, why is it not I guess I hear what she's talking about, but why is it not making me, play some more, pick up the saxophone? It's until I began reading Hortense Spillers that I realized that the gendered subject, the gendered subject, when she says gender is performative, it's a particular kind of woman, okay, who's already a human being, whatever that means, to which I don't think the black female subject is, right? So I began to think about, okay, what would it look like if people fled? What would it look like to de-gender? What would it be like to de-gender womanhood? And suddenly I thought of, and borrowing from Fred Moulton and others, the question of fugitive. And I began to think about fugitive feminisms. And the notion of fugitive enabled me then to look back at this film, or be back at this work, in order to see what is actually going on in the figure, or produced, or suggested in the figure of Winnie Mandela. Okay, so what does fugitive allow us to do? Well, victimhood is an event. It is something that happens to you. Okay? It is not, the minute that it defines you, your identity, or politically, psychoanalytically, you're finished. What is interesting about Winnie is that precisely her refusal to describe herself or to come into representation as victim throughout, regardless of everybody trying to talk about her being a victim. And in a way that fugitive feminism allows me to do that. Now, why am I going to fugitive? Because that sort of transcendence, that crossover, that transnational way in which it moves away from what I would call the erotic, not that's not important, but away from that, so that we can come back and interrogate the kind of lives, the kind of placing, the kind of representations that so are imprisoned the way in which the figure of Winnie Mandela is talked about. Okay. The third imitation that came to my mind is the you know, I would like, I know most of us know who Desmond Tutu is. I know the kind of remarks he makes internationally. Some people are his friends, some people he's some people's bishop, he's some people's father, neighbor. He probably walks old folks across the zebra crossing. I really would like him now to be able to say something about his own indictment. I really would like most of us to rewrite, to put into center place Winnie, not just Winnie, but the figure of woman. Now, what does that mean? I don't mean in that kind of make it the new celebrity, but how we might think with it. Now, feminism can do two things. It can make you and break you. It did both to me. It does two things simultaneously. We have to allow ourselves to make it do that. And one of the joys of this work is that it does operate as a way of kind of retrieving those kind of lost ways of reading in the middle of a history that is contained the last 50 years of political history and so on. So that then we are able to figure out what is going on about reordering, rethinking relationships. You can think about it. Let me just think, this is not a joke, let me think about it. I can't tell you, I have to make a confession. I don't think I could manage a month of being celibate. You might think that I'm being ridiculous. I don't think so. But can you imagine 28 years? And then somebody, when at the end somebody comes out and says, you're guilty as charged, because at some point in those 28 years, while you were waiting for your lover or husband or whatever relationship you had, they were in prison, you shouldn't have. What? Would a man have been expected to do that? Absolutely not. If you just follow it that way, And in many ways, that's precisely what the story around the embodiment of Winnie Mandela, literally from the moment Nelson was released, right up to the end, around did she or did she not? Now, there's something really very troubling about that. Because in a sense, it's not about polyamory, but it's rather says something about the continuing nature of patriarchy. It's about power. It is in relation to that. It is race, yes. It is colored, yes. It is classed, yes. It is disablism, yes. But it is about the body and subject of womanhood. I mean, that in that self speaks to our condition. It speaks to our sense of self. And I think the film allows you to imagine those. Let me just a slightly different detour around the question of style. I'm of a certain age. I'm younger than Mick Jagger, but I can still rock. I'm from the 60s. And it's always very fascinating when I'm talking to people that they're surprised by how old I am. As the film was going, I know exactly where I was in 1964. And I know I was living in a place called Harare, which is in Zimbabwe, just north of South Africa. And those images are very familiar to me. I remember very vividly, I was looking at images of Angela Davis, looking with that kind of afro, which is almost identical in terms of style to kind of like Winnie Mandela. And it's almost like it's to the extent that most people don't think of 1968, as having an overseas. It had an overseas. You kind of see her coming out of that beetle, in that kind of style, looking regular, like, I don't know, Los Angeles mostly. But this is in the middle of somewhere else, this elsewhere. And there's a kind of swagger she has, a kind of now she has, which somehow disrupts for me what is otherwise for most people to think is kind of imprisoned in a kind of heteronormative fashion framing. It does that. It is that this is a work, this is a subject of the modern in a completely different way from what most people imagine. And you see it in the kind of style, in the fashion, in the dress, in the manner. Yeah? The kind of dignity. Somebody who says, I own the earth in which I do. Flashback, when she's talking about the moment at the beginning of the film, and she's talking about her father, the principal, whom this is Daddy's girl, right? What does she do? One would expect she's going to say, well, you don't need to read and expect text. Right? No, she doesn't say. She goes to the ancestors. She goes to somewhere else. She says, he taught me about my ancestors. And he taught me about the land. And that's what's made me. And it struck me as something to do with time and timeliness in a kind of futuristic discussion, which turns on its head the idea of the place of what I call going to the temple in a very Buddhist sense, about the placing of the body, the place of the unconscious and so on. And it's imbricated in the style, in the fashion, in the way in which she positions herself, the way in which she carries her body, past, present. A friend was saying just earlier on, tea would come from Trinidad, if I can borrow that, right? That the first time when she arrived there, everybody was expecting via Wakanda form some person to arrive dressed up in a sort of like an African dress. And suddenly she comes at days of the plane as if, she just turned off from Los Angeles or something. It sort of disrupted that. It disrupts that placing of the African metropolitan context in a past, God knows what's past, into another modern. It's all there in the style. Have a look at the hairdo, It is amazingly so Afro. So Afro. And I say to most of my American friends, well, you thought you brought it there. It was already there. It was kind of like, you thought you could do the Cosby Show, yeah? It was already there. So there is I think the documentary wonderfully, through the aesthesis, through style, brings her into the modern. So she's not a thing of the past, locked into something that was desperate. She is already in the present. As a mother, as a friend, as a auntie, she never says I. She always says we. It's almost like herself disappears. It's almost she's talking about herself, but actually she doesn't talk about herself. And that ability in Winnie and the film works beautifully for me. Okay. The moment in which one evokes the stuff I've just described sometimes invites people to figure out what next. I'm increasingly aware that the experience of Black Europe or Afro-Europe or the elsewhere in Europe hasn't quite formed into a body or bodies of knowledge from which one can think, if you like, this city and its elsewhere. So in that sense, the film places it alongside that, or at least the curatorial language, curatorial project I talked about, place it in that possibility of providing us with the kind of ways of producing the knowledges that allow us to decolonize our aesthesis, our ways of imagining the world. I say that in the moment of the way the story of migration has returned with a vengeance on the bodies of women mainly and their children. And there is no other way to think with other than the experience of Winnie. Now, I mentioned Zimbabwe earlier. If you cast your mind back historically to the period of the 50s, and the period of the 50s and 60s in Zimbabwe, and just prior to Ian Smith was something that was called the Federation of Rhodesia in Nyasaland. There was a struggle to get it demolished or to Caroline. This is Britain's attempt to try and put together the last dominion of the kind internationally, or out there. Another South Africa, another Canada, another Australia. It became unstuck, and there was a movement against it. And the settler members of the Federation of Rhodesian Nyasaland built what was called detention centers. They were like little bits and compounds in the middle of game reserves, just like where Winnie was. What I'm trying to say, the dress rehearsal of what I see happening around Winnie had taken place during the Federation of Rhodesian Nyasaland. Families moved from one place to another, or husbands put in detention centers in which their wives only got to see them once a week, or twice a month, or once a year, over a period of 15 years. To some of us from the region, this had become so normal. It's so normalized. I couldn't resist thinking about that in relation to Palestine, in relation to what's going on just there. So there's a kind of way in which even those stresses, both their present, my own histories, I think there are those too. I invite you to go to Namibia if you can, and walk on the beach, and get into VW there, and see what it does to you. Okay? And read it back to that place, the figure of the red VW. So there's a kind of concept, a kind of conversation that is going on as you watch the film. Now, so those are the kind of 3 or 4 or 5 tropes that are going on in my head as I was watching the film. And I just end with perhaps a proper film reading about the importance of the archive. I suggest you should go and talk to your grandparents, especially your grandmothers, especially those, if you have any grandparents that lived in the empire. Ask them to show you their private letters. They will give you the material that you need, which is probably parallel to the example of this film. And I hope you can make a similar documentary that speaks to the German condition in that opening. Thank you.